Good evening. Welcome to the inaugural episode of this unprecedented documentary series, finally revealing exactly who and what the Slavic vampire was, and perhaps still is. So, is the Slavic vampire real? Of course he is. We know the Slavic vampire is real because we have the words of a real Slavic vampire proving he is. Words written down in his own hand almost 1,000 years ago, reaching out to us across the mists and oceans of time to speak forcefully to us once again. Tonight's episode, The Vampire of History Speaks. Here in the West, almost all we know about the vampire comes from fiction. And not even Slavic fiction, but instead our own. From the penny dreadfuls of Europe to Stoker's Dracula, and then on to all Hollywood has done ever since, and later still authors like Rice and Meyer, and all the rest. Sadly, we've been programmed from childhood on to believe with absolute certainty that vampires are undeniably demonic, terrifying, insatiably bloodthirsty, undead revenants seeking to forever enthrall us, entice us, seduce us into their evil eternal embrace. And we believe it, all of it, because that's what our vampire fictions and films teach us. But what of actual Slavic history? Are such traits found there as well? When all our fictional assumptions and pop cultural definitions are thrown out, what do the actual historical evidences tell us? Well, that's what we're going to find out. That's what this series is all about. For tonight, we embark upon the search for the Slavic vampire of history. And as you will be able to verify throughout this series, what's to be presented tonight and in every episode that follows are nothing but the undistilled facts and evidences from doctorate-level Slavic scholars, historians, ethnographers, and folklorists, as well as from academicians across many multidisciplinary fields, ultimately revealing, for the first time ever, the real Slavic vampire. So let's begin that search at the very beginning. Indeed, a very good place to start. For it was there, late in the 10th century, 988 CE to be exact, that Russia was converted when Vladimir the Great, the ruler over all the Russias at that time, adopted Christianity. And with that adoption, Vladimir gave his subjects two choices: either get baptized in the river or be drowned in it. Thus was all of Russia forcibly Christianized. Now, let's fast forward 59 years to the time and place the first Slavic vampire of history makes his shocking appearance. The time, 1047 CE. The place, Novgorod, Russia. Seen here in modern times, this beautiful medieval city remains much as it did in the 11th century, complete with its original Kremlin walls. You see, in Russian, Kremlin means fortress, and this Kremlin here is the precursor to Moscow's later Kremlin that we know today. You see, second only to Kiev in size and power, Novgorod was also the second most important ecclesiastical center of its day, with its own bishop and at least one very special scholarly priest, housed and operating out of St. Sophia's Cathedral, seen right here in the center in white, all still in existence today, almost unchanged 1,000 years later. Now, ruling Novgorod in preparation for ruling over all the Russias was Prince Vladimir, the eldest son of then Tsar Yaroslav the Wise, who himself was the son of Vladimir the Great. Yeah, that same fun-loving guy who forced everyone into Christianity. And as symbolized in this painting, it was Prince Vladimir's additional responsibility to hold close and protect St. Sophia's Cathedral and the fledgling new Christian religion it represented. And assisting him in all of this was Bishop Luka Ziadata, the first Novgorodian bishop sent directly from the Eastern Holy See in Constantinople to direct and oversee the ongoing efforts to indoctrinate the newly Christianized pagan Slavs into Christianity and its foreign Judeo-Christian religious principles and concepts, as found, of course, in the Bible. Of course, to do that, the Slavs first had to learn to read and write, because prior to the arrival of Christianity, the Slavs had no written language. There was no literacy. And what better way to accomplish this than by translating the Bible into Russian and each of its books into the Cyrillic alphabet? And to get that done, Bishop Ziadata enlisted the help of one of his priests, to whom he assigned the responsibility from the 14th of May to the 19th of December of that year of transcribing by hand into Cyrillic the 12 books of the minor prophets of the Old Testament. Now, once complete, this linguist priest then wrote at the front of his work what's called a marginalia or a colophon. It's a kind of memorandum describing what he had done and why. The completed work and colophon were then handed over to the bishop. And as seen here, this is that very colophon containing the very words written by this 11th century scholarly priest. Today, this colophon is still in existence and on display at the State Historical Museum of Russia in Moscow. As you'll notice, I have highlighted here 3 very specific words, 3 critically important words that forever change everything we thought we knew about the historical vampire. Now, to make out the original Cyrillic letters even better, I have recreated in Cyrillic font so you can compare them with the original script, those very words, verifying for you that the reproduction is accurate. And here, I have transcribed them into our alphabet so that you can read the words for yourself, most specifically the first 2, Pope Opius. Now, as you may or may not know, Cyrillic is largely derived from the Greek alphabet. And as we can clearly see in the letters here, we can see some of the Greek letters, in particular the letter pi in the first and third letters of that first word. The O symbol in between, that's the same in both the Greek alphabet and our own. And the fourth letter is not really a letter at all, but similar in a sense to our apostrophe in that it makes no sound. Thus, the first word we know is Pope, and it means the same in Old Russian as it does in Latin and also to some extent in English. It's fundamentally the same as Papa, or in other words, Father. It's the same word from which we get the Catholic term, Pope, meaning Father also. And it's pronounced the same way as well. This verifies the ecclesiastical office, the priesthood of the transcriber, as a Christian father, a Christian priest. Now, before tackling the second word, I'm going to let you know up front, I will not be translating in this episode the third word here, but we're going to get to it. All I will reveal for now is that the third word here in Old Russian is lichwi, and it is an adjective describing the term before it. In other words, opiate. As we will discover, it is this adjective's 11th century meaning that reveals one of the key pieces to the puzzle of what the Slavic vampire was and his true supernatural nature. For now, though, let's step back to that second word, opiate. As we see, the first letter is the same as our O, the second is equivalent to our U, and if you look closely, you can see the third letter is the same pi symbol as seen in the first word. In other words, it's a P. This is followed by 2 other letters equivalent to our I and R, followed by another apostrophe-like determinative that is silent. Thus we have opiate. Now, it's this word's translation that continues to rock the Slavic world to this day. Its translation has been so shocking to scholars that the world has heard next to nothing about it ever since its discovery. For this word, written in Old Russian, when translated into English, is beyond any doubt our word, vampire. How about that? The meaning of this translation is beyond any doubt. The priest is giving us here his very name, I, Father, Vampire. This was his official, ecclesiastical, and personal Christian name by which he was known to all, superiors and believers alike. His actual name, given at birth, was Vampire. Thus, by this 11th century document, we learn that the first undeniable Slavic vampire in recorded history, as he so declares himself to be, in a formal church document, is in fact pretty much the exact polar opposite of everything we have ever thought the vampire to be. The reverse of everything our fiction and films has ever claimed he is. He is in fact a crucifix-wearing, obviously non-blood-drinking, deeply religious, highly educated, well-regarded, mortal Eastern Orthodox Christian priest. And we know this simply by the fact that were he to be, or claimed to have been, a blood-drinking, reanimated corpse as a priest, he sure as hell wouldn't have been accepted into the priesthood to begin with, much less sent to Novgorod to actively educate pagans on Christianity. So if a Christian priest, is it possible I have translated or concluded in error about this? No, for this is not my conclusion, but that of doctorate-level Slavicists and Russian linguists worldwide. As example, Dr. Bruce McClelland, who also specializes in the Russian language, verifies this priest to have been an actual vampire beyond any doubt. As he concludes, the earliest written reference to vampire is Old Russian, appearing in the margin of a partially glagolithic text, the Book of the Minor Prophets, dated to 1047 CE. That's right, this same book. Further, he says that the actual form of the inscription, is Opiid, being the East Slavic variant of South Slavic vampire. So what's he talking about? What does it mean, East Slavic variant of South Slavic vampire? And how do we ever get from Opiid to vampire and from there to our English vampire? Well, to review that, let's take a look at the etymological history of the term itself. As seen here in this map, Slavic lands extend from Central Europe through Eastern Europe and deep into Western Russia. All the lands here are kind of in that purple color, where despite the dozens of different cultures, languages, and dialects across these many millions of square miles, and despite such antagonistic religions practiced there, from Christianity to Islam, yet all of these lands and cultures share the common belief in and cultural history evidencing for the existence of the vampire since ancient times. While here in the West, meaning primarily Western Europe, United States Kingdom, and America, we only recently were made aware of the term. In English, the term only existed since about 1734. There are other evidences that might indicate 1732, as vampire, the word we know today. However, we got that word from the French, and before that, from the Germans in their term, vampire. The Germans got it from the Austrians, who first printed the term in the plural form, vampiri, in 1725, referring to the very Serbian vampire panics that they were then investigating in the Balkan Slavic lands of Serbia and Croatia, where their term is the same, vampire. The most prolific of these alleged vampires were the two celebrated vampire cases of Petar Blagojevich and Arnold Paule. And that's how we in the West acquired the term. But that's not where the term began. We're only just getting started. Prior to this, the South Slavic term was bapir, and possibly before this, bepir and bupir, though the evidence and connections to these latter two is rather scant and still indeterminate. You also notice I've added question marks afterwards, indicating we don't know how far back in history these terms began. However, almost everywhere else throughout all Slavic lands, the term for vampire has continued largely the same. The term upir, found as far west as Croatia, Czechia, and its very close variant, upior, in Poland. where we also find the term Vampires. And yes, I pronounced it as a V, because in Polish, as also in German, the W sounds like a V. And again, you'll notice the question marks after each of these, because again, we have no idea how far back these terms go. And now it's possible that the V might have been added to the term about the same time in both Poland and South Slavic lands, for reasons we don't yet know. However, as we see pretty much everywhere else, and the further east we go, the term is and always has been opiate. Now, were there other names for the vampire? Of course there were. A few were more prolific than others. And most especially, I want to point out that are the names that existed along a narrow corridor running west from the Black Sea to Austria that became popular following the strange case of Juri Grando, which names are Strigoi and Strigon that we'll explore in the next episode. Another interesting variant is the Romanian term mulo, which simply and understandably means dead person or revenant, which makes perfect sense given how the vampire was defined by this later date. Yet, as we have seen, predating all of these terms, by several centuries at least, is opiate, and likely predating even opiate, and located the furthest northeast of them all, is our own Father Opiate in Novgorod, Russia, 1047 CE. Now, verifying what Dr. McClelland had stated, Dr. Dorian Townsend states that this term and its opiate variant dates back as far as 1047 CE with Father Vampire. However, she doesn't stop here, but instead goes on to point out what Slavicists have also known for centuries, yet still can't reconcile with our Western view of the vampire, that the vampire has been an aspect of Slavic belief since before the rise of Orthodoxy. In other words, since before the arrival of Christianity to Slavic lands, the vampire has been a part of Slavic culture. So now that we know beyond any doubt this Christian priest was indeed a full-fledged Slavic vampire, don't you find it strange that no one has ever bothered before to have his actual words translated for us to hear today? And yet such is the case. These words have never before been made public. Until now. Here are the very words in their original Old Russian as written by this vampire priest and speaking to us across almost 1,000 years of time. And here I have highlighted in purple the priest's given name as he wrote it himself. I, Father Vampire. And finally, here we have its English translation. Glory unto thee, Lord, heavenly Tsar, that you have enabled me to write this book in Cyrillic for Prince Vladimir of the Novgorod Principality, son of Yaroslav the Great. I began to write in the year 6555, that's the equivalent of 1047 CE, on the 14th of May and finished the same year, December 19th. I, Father Opiate Lihui. With this I pray that all will read this prophecy, for great are the marvels written down for us by the prophets in these books. See? Nothing evil here, nothing demonic. To the contrary, in fact, we see the words of an obviously deeply religious and believing Christian priest giving thanks to God and praising as marvelous the prophecies in the books he has transcribed, exhorting all to read them. Yet he is also a true vampire, while also not being what we believe the vampire to be. How can this glaring discrepancy be reconciled? For now, just know that it can be, fully, and for reasons as astounding as they are absolutely proved strictly by the evidences. Perhaps now it's starting to make sense why apparently no one wanted these words translated. After all, why muddy the waters of all we thought the vampire to be by calling into question those same fiction-fueled assumptions? And in the case of one doctorate-level vampirologist I know, he chose not to publish the actual translation so as to not call into question his argument that this vampire priest must have been some sort of sinful heretic and a practitioner of pagan feasting rites. Obviously, publishing this priest's pious words would have flown in the face of his defaming that priest as a heretical pagan. Now I tried pointing out to him, in vain, the discrepancies in such a position. Discrepancies that include the insanity of thinking a priest would openly proclaim himself a heretic and a practicing pagan in a time and place when being a heretic would have gotten him immediately defrocked and excommunicated, if not also executed on the spot for both heresy and blasphemy, as well as for treason against the state for acting directly contrary to the edicts of Vladimir the Great himself. You see, they didn't mess around with religious or political dissension back then, much less both at the same time. Now, there is one sentence remaining of this priest's words I have not yet provided you, for it is the most tantalizing and also the most enigmatic to history. For while the preceding sentences are addressed first to God and then to his Christian congregants, praying all will read the great marvels of the prophecies written in the books he translated, yet the last sentence I'm about to provide is strangely addressed not to his Christian brothers and sisters, nor to his superior, the bishop, not even to God himself, but is instead a private correspondence to the sole ruler of Novgorod and the heir apparent to the Russian throne himself, Prince Vladimir. And here's what he says: "Be healthy, O prince, live 100 years, but of the one writing this, do not forget." Now, on the surface, it seems simple enough to us. After all, we live in what we call a free country, where we have due process of law and where our government officials, even the president, cannot arbitrarily or capriciously punish or kill us on a whim. In the 11th century Russia, however, monarchs like Vladimir the Great, Yaroslav the Wise, and here Prince Vladimir were the law of the land, and whatever they decreed, including executions, were obeyed and carried out immediately, no questions asked. One did not address them lightly, much less command them, which is exactly what this priest does. Let's take another look and read it again. Now, live 100 years. This is a common colloquialism in Russian, basically essentially meaning may you live forever. But notice that this is immediately followed by a condition being added to that well-wish in the form of a direct command. But of the one writing this, do not forget. The implication here seems to be, if the prince wishes to live a long life, he had best obey the command here given him of not forgetting the priest. Now, depending on how read, this could be interpreted as either being brazenly insubordinate or as being directly treasonous in giving the prince an implied threat, a threat to his life. Kings and princes have executed priests for far less than this. Yet that is what this priest says. Now, we don't know the answer to this mystery, as it is lost to time. However, to my mind, this sort of implies some special knowledge shared between the prince and this vampire priest, perhaps specific to the priest's true nature, that the prince must remember if he wishes to live a long life. Now, what this might have been, we cannot know, but its unspoken import is most tantalizing to consider. And there you have it, the indisputable words of a bona fide Slavic vampire, himself revealed to be a deeply religious Christian priest, and translated and made publicly available here for the first time, and revealing him to be nothing at all like the demonic creature of our vampire fictions. Now that we know beyond any doubt vampires have existence since before the rise of Christianity, now that we know one of them was himself a bona fide, fully ordained Christian priest, how could we still believe they were ever blood-drinking revenants? In over 300 years of claimed vampire accounts, let me ask you, how many blood-drained corpses have ever been found? How many graves without their formerly deceased occupants? How many alleged surviving victims have ever come forward claiming and showing actual evidences of having had their blood drank by one? You know, when you think about it, if vampires are by their very nature what we claim them to be, that they must drink blood to continue their undead existence, Then where are these mountains of blood-drained corpses we should expect to find? Instead, what have we actually found? If you guessed absolutely nothing, you'd be right. So what happened? What is the truth? And how deep does this vampire rabbit hole go? Far deeper than you could ever have thought. Let me give you a peek at just how deep it goes. And I'm going to do that by throwing up here a timeline for the Slavic vampire, from the current day back to the arrival of Christianity in Russia. Want to venture a guess at what point we find the first mention of vampires as blood-drinking revenants? What, 1,000 years ago? How about half that time, 500? 400 perhaps? Let's try 300 years. That's all, and only found in South Slavic lands. And yet, there's Father Vampire 700 years before the first mention. So, the question immediately becomes, where are all the accounts of vampires and their history in between? Why do we find nothing in over 600 years, yet we find nothing being mentioned by Slavicists or vampirologists? Why is it we only begin to find mention of vampires after that and beginning only in the 17th century? It's almost as if, where vampirologists are concerned, there is a self-imposed historical barrier right there at the beginning of the 17th century, prior to which they do not dare cross. And yet, we know that they know that the vampire existed prior to then, as already Doctors McClelland and Townsend have both admitted that the vampire has been in existence amongst the Slavs since before the rise of Orthodoxy. So think about it. When did Orthodoxy arise in Russia? Well, we know that it arrived in 988, or at least it was fully Christianized in 988. Yet we know that the Slavic lands further west were Christianized long before that. So where are the evidences for vampires predating 900 CE? Okay, is the rabbit hole deep enough for you? We're going to go even deeper still, because you see, it goes much further back. According to another famous vampirologist and Slavic expert, Professor Felix Oinas, the vampire extends far further back into Slavic history than even the rise of Christianity, going all the way back to the Proto-Slavic period. And when was that? Would you believe all the way back to 400 CE? That's right. When the Roman Empire was still ruling South Slavic lands, the vampire was already there and known amongst the Slavs. And yet, throughout all of that time, not a single mention of them as blood-drinking revenants. Now, were I to tell you how the Slavs truly felt about the vampire and what they said their true traits were, you simply wouldn't believe me. But the point here for this episode is that instead of only going back 600 years of missing history, we have now just doubled that missing history to 1,200 years. And we're only just getting started on how far back their history and their evidences go. And you know something? That's exactly what this series is all about. Because this series, throughout it, we're going to investigate all those 1,200 years and far more millennia earlier still. That is what Father Vampire is all about. That's what this channel is all about. That's what I am all about, and why I have chosen this moniker to honor that long-forgotten, largely ignored, indisputably documented, real vampire of history himself. And we hope you'll join us for episode 2, Defanging the Blood-Drinking Vampires of History. Until then, thank you and good night.